The grand throne room of the Zynthian palace gleamed with crystalline structures that hummed with barely contained power. Empress Lydia stood motionless, her luminescent eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. The medical report was final, absolute, devastating. Her daughter, Princess Eleanor, would never speak again. 3 months had passed since the accident. 3 months of silence that felt like an eternity. The princess had been on a routine diplomatic mission to the neighboring star system when something went terribly wrong. A solar flare had struck her transport ship, and the impact had damaged the neural implant that connected her mind to the communication network. In the Zynthian civilization, where most beings relied on telepathic networks and advanced neural interfaces to speak and think together, losing this ability was like losing your voice, your identity, your very soul. Empress Lydia remembered that terrible day when the news reached her. She had been in the council chambers discussing trade agreements with other species when her personal advisor rushed in with fear written all over his face. The words had come out in a jumble, but the meaning was clear. Princess Eleanor had been injured. She was alive, but something was very wrong. The Empress had dropped everything and rushed to the medical wing of the palace, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. When she first saw Eleanor lying in the medical pod, connected to dozens of machines and glowing tubes of healing liquid, Lydia had nearly collapsed. Her only daughter, her beautiful and brilliant daughter, lay unconscious and broken. The doctors had worked around the clock, trying to repair the damaged implant, trying to restore the neural pathways that allowed the princess to communicate with others. For the first few days there had been hope. The machines beeped and buzzed with activity. The doctors spoke in hushed, technical tones about neural reconstruction and consciousness transfer. But hope had faded as the weeks passed. The finest minds in the Zynthian collective had gathered in the palace. Scientists from across the galaxy had sent their research and their theories. They tried neural reconstruction, rebuilding the damaged circuits that connected Eleanor's brain to the communication systems. They attempted consciousness transfer, trying to move her mind into a new, healthy body. They even experimented with biosynthetic interfaces, attempting to create a bridge between her biological brain and advanced technology. Each attempt failed. Each failure brought fresh tears to the Empress's eyes. Eleanor had woken up after 2 weeks, and that was both a blessing and a curse. She could move. She could see and hear. Her mind was perfectly intact, sharp and intelligent as ever. But she could not speak. She could not communicate through the neural networks that all Zynthians used. She was trapped inside her own body, unable to tell anyone what she was thinking or feeling. The doctors said the neural pathways were too damaged, too complex to repair. They said it might take decades to develop new technology that could help her. Empress Lydia had watched her daughter's beautiful eyes fill with tears of frustration. She had seen Eleanor try to write things down, only to realize that without the neural implant, writing felt slow and clumsy compared to the instantaneous thought-sharing that Zynthians normally enjoyed. She had witnessed the princess grow quieter and sadder with each passing day, withdrawing from the world, losing hope. It was that sight that broke something inside the Empress. One night, after another exhausting day of failed treatments, Lydia sat alone in her private chambers. The palace was quiet around her, the hum of the crystalline structures the only sound. She thought about Eleanor as a child, laughing and playing in the palace gardens. She thought about Eleanor as a teenager, brilliant and curious, asking questions about everything. She thought about Eleanor as a young woman, full of promise and potential, ready to take her place in the galaxy. And then she thought about the future. A future where Eleanor would spend her entire life in silence, unable to share her thoughts with anyone, unable to have a true conversation, unable to experience the full richness of Zynthian life. The thought was unbearable. Empress Lydia stood up, her decision made in that moment. She would not accept this. There had to be a solution. There had to be someone, somewhere in the vast galaxy who could help her daughter. She would search every corner of the universe if she had to. She would offer whatever it took. The next morning, Lydia made her way to the communication center of the palace. The technicians bowed as she entered. She stood before the massive broadcast array and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she activated the system. This was not something an empress usually did. This was not dignified or proper. But Lydia had never cared much about dignity when it came to her daughter. "I am Empress Lydia of the Zynthian Collective," she announced, and her voice echoed across quantum networks and through star systems. Billions of beings from hundreds of different species heard her words. "My daughter, Princess Eleanor, has suffered an injury that has taken away her ability to communicate. The greatest doctors and scientists in my civilization have tried everything, but nothing has worked." She paused, gathering her emotions. I am asking for help, she continued, and her voice was steady now, filled with determination. I am asking anyone in this galaxy, anyone in this universe who thinks they might have a solution to come forward. Whoever can restore my daughter's ability to speak, to communicate, to share her thoughts with others, will receive unlimited resources. They will receive wealth beyond anything they could imagine. They will receive a place of honor in the Zintian collective. This is not a request. This is a promise. I am Empress Lydia, and I give you my word. The transmission ended. Empress Lydia stood in the communication center, feeling both exhausted and strangely hopeful. She did not know what would come next. She did not know if anyone would answer her call. But she had done something. She had taken action. She had refused to accept defeat. In her chambers, Princess Eleanor heard about her mother's announcement through a written message. She read the words, and for the first time in 3 months she smiled. It was a small smile, hesitant and uncertain, but it was there. Somewhere in the galaxy, in places the Empress had never even heard of, beings of all kinds were reading the message and making a choice. Some laughed at the impossible task. Some began gathering their tools and their knowledge. And one human mechanic, sitting in a salvage yard on the outer rim, looked up at the stars and thought, maybe, just maybe, this was his moment. The salvage yard on Kepler Station stretched out like a graveyard of forgotten dreams. Rows upon rows of damaged spacecraft lay silent in the dust, their hulls stripped bare of valuable components. Some ships were so old that no one could remember what civilization had built them. Others were newer, destroyed in accidents or battles that nobody cared about anymore. Among all this wreckage moved a single figure, a man with weathered hands and a tired face, working quietly in the afternoon sun. His name was Thomas Wright, and he was 43 years old. He had been working in the salvage yard for almost 20 years, ever since he had arrived on Kepler Station with nothing but the clothes on his back and a skill for fixing broken things. Thomas was not impressive by the standards of the galaxy. He had no advanced degrees from prestigious universities. He had no neural enhancements that made his brain work faster or smarter. He had no connections to powerful people or important organizations. What Thomas had was something much simpler, something that most advanced civilizations had forgotten about. He had hands that understood machines. He had a mind that saw problems differently than everyone else. And he had a stubborn refusal to accept that anything was truly broken beyond repair. Thomas was currently working on a transport ship that had crashed 3 months ago. The owner had written it off as a total loss and sold it to the salvage yard for almost nothing. But Thomas had looked at it carefully and seen something different. He saw potential. He saw a ship that could fly again if someone just took the time to understand what was wrong with it. So he had spent his free hours working on it, piece by piece, system by system, slowly bringing it back to life. The supervisor of the salvage yard was a Valerian officer named Kretch, a being with purple skin and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Kretch had always tolerated Thomas because the human was a good worker who never complained and never asked for much. But Kretch did not respect Thomas. To Kretch, humans were primitives, creatures who had somehow survived without the advanced technology that other species took for granted. On the day that Empress Lydia's message reached Kepler Station, Kretch was in his office when Thomas came in to ask for supplies. The Valerian was watching the broadcast on his screen and he was laughing. "Did you see this?" Kretch asked, not bothering to hide his amusement. "The Empress of the Zintians is offering a reward to anyone who can fix her daughter. Can you imagine? Unlimited wealth and power to whoever solves this problem. Every scientist and genius in the galaxy is probably heading toward the Zintian homeworld right now." Thomas stopped what he was doing and looked at the screen. He watched the Empress's face as she made her announcement. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the determination in her voice. He understood immediately what it meant. A parent who would move heaven and earth for her child. A problem that the greatest minds in the galaxy could not solve. An impossible task. "I'm going," Thomas said quietly. Kretch burst into laughter so hard that his whole body shook. "You?" he gasped between fits of laughter. "A human? You're going to travel to the Zintian homeworld and solve a problem that their greatest scientists cannot solve? That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard." "Maybe," Thomas said. He was not offended. He had heard worse doubts from better people. "But I'm going anyway." "The Zintians will laugh you out of their palace," Kretch continued, still amused. "They will not even let you through the front door. You are a human from a salvage yard. You have nothing to offer them." Thomas did not argue. He simply started packing his few belongings. That night, he booked passage on a transport ship headed toward the Zintian homeworld. It was not a comfortable journey. The ship was old and crowded with other beings who had also heard the Empress's call. Thomas shared a small cabin with 3 other travelers, all of them hoping to win the reward. During the long weeks of travel, Thomas did something different from all the other would-be problem solvers on the ship. While they spent their time studying advanced neural theory and complex medical textbooks that they barely understood, Thomas was doing something else entirely. He was studying human history. He read about people from ancient Earth who had communicated without technology. He studied how humans had used hand gestures, facial expressions, and body language to share ideas and emotions. He learned about different writing systems that humans had developed over thousands of years. He watched videos of people who had overcome terrible disabilities, finding new ways to communicate and live full lives. He filled notebook after notebook with sketches and theories that seemed ridiculous to anyone who happened to see them. One of the other travelers, a Xinthian scientist, saw Thomas's notebooks and laughed at him. "What is this primitive scribbling?" the scientist asked. "Are you trying to solve a neural problem with drawings from ancient history? This is why humans are so inferior. You do not think logically." But Thomas did not respond to the insult. He simply continued with his work, filling page after page with ideas about communication, connection, and the different ways that beings could share thoughts and feelings. When Thomas finally arrived at the Xinthian homeworld, the palace guards actually laughed at the sight of him. A human, wearing clothes that were worn and patched, carrying a worn backpack filled with old notebooks, requesting access to Princess Eleanor. It was absurd. It was insulting. Several guards wanted to throw him out immediately. But something strange happened when Thomas was brought before Empress Lydia. He did not try to impress her with fancy theories or advanced credentials. He did not bow and scrape and tell her how honored he was to be in her presence. He simply stood there, calm and quiet, and looked at her with honest eyes. "I know you're desperate," he said simply. "I can see it in your face. I've seen that same look on people before when they've tried everything and nothing has worked. But I think maybe your scientists have been looking in the wrong direction. I think maybe they've been trying to build something too complicated, when what Eleanor needs is something different." Empress Lydia studied this strange human for a long moment. She could see that he was not a genius or a scholar. She could see that he was just an ordinary man who worked with his hands. But she could also see something else. She could see honesty. She could see intelligence of a different kind. She could see someone who truly believed he could help. "Show me," she said finally. And that was how Thomas Wright, a human mechanic from a salvage yard on the Outer Rim, became the Empress's unlikely hope for saving her daughter. Princess Eleanor's chambers were located in the highest tower of the palace, a place designed to be beautiful and comfortable. The walls were made of soft, glowing crystal that changed colors with her moods. The windows looked out over the entire palace gardens, where strange and wonderful plants grew in every color imaginable. Everything in the room was perfect, luxurious, and utterly isolating. Eleanor sat by the window as she did every day, watching the world move below her without being able to participate in it. Her mind was sharp and alert. She could think clearly and remember everything perfectly. But her voice was gone. The ability to share her thoughts with others had been stolen from her by the accident, and no amount of luxury could make up for that loss. When Thomas walked into her chambers for the first time, Eleanor did not look up. She had seen dozens of doctors and scientists come through that door, each one promising to fix her, each one leaving disappointed. She expected nothing from this strange human, and she did not bother to hide her indifference. Thomas did not try to impress her or explain his qualifications. He did not show her complex diagrams or talk about advanced technology. Instead, he simply sat down in a chair across from her and said, "Hello. I'm Thomas. I'm going to listen to you." Eleanor turned to look at him, surprised by the simplicity of his words. Most people who came to see her tried to do all the talking. They tried to tell her about treatments and theories and why they thought they could help. This human was different. He was not trying to prove anything. He was simply saying that he would listen. Over the following days and weeks, Thomas did something remarkable. He paid attention to Eleanor in a way that no one else had thought to do. He watched her carefully, studying every small movement and gesture. He noticed the way her hands moved when she was trying to express something complicated. He saw how her eyes lit up when she was excited about an idea. He recognized the small frustrations that crossed her face when she could not communicate what she was thinking. Most importantly, Thomas noticed something that all the advanced scientists had overlooked. Eleanor was already communicating. She was just not using the methods they expected. One afternoon, Thomas was sitting with Eleanor in her chamber when she became frustrated. She wanted to tell him something but could not find a way to express it. She started to write on a tablet, moving her fingers slowly across the screen. But then she stopped and simply hummed instead. It was a beautiful sound, soft and musical, coming from deep within her chest. As Thomas listened to her humming, he realized something important. "You're already speaking," he told her, his voice quiet but certain. "They just forgot to listen." Eleanor stopped humming and looked at him with confusion. What did he mean? How could she be speaking when everyone said she could not? "Come with me," Thomas said. He took her hand gently and led her outside to the palace gardens. They walked among the strange plants and flowers, and Thomas pointed out all the different ways that things in nature communicated without using words. He showed her how the plants changed colors to attract insects. He explained how animals used body language and sounds to share information with each other. He talked about how humans had communicated for thousands of years before they developed advanced technology. "Humans are really good at working with what we have instead of what we want," Thomas explained as they walked. "That's the advantage of being primitive. We learn to adapt. We learned to find solutions using whatever was available to us." Eleanor listened intently. She began to understand that communication was not just one specific thing. It was not just the neural implant that the Xinthians relied on. Communication was many things. It was gesture and expression. It was sound and movement. It was emotion and intention. Over the next few weeks, Thomas began his work on creating something that would help Eleanor. But he did not start by building complex circuits or designing advanced technology. Instead, he started by understanding Eleanor herself. He learned what she was thinking and feeling. He asked her questions through writing and gesture, and he paid close attention to her answers. Eleanor began to trust him in a way she had not trusted anyone since her accident. She showed him her journals, where she had written thousands of words in beautiful handwriting. She introduced him to her favorite memories. She shared with him the things she most wanted to say to the people she loved. Thomas took all of this information and began to design a new kind of system. It was unlike anything the Xinthian scientists had attempted. He was not trying to rebuild the damaged neural implant. He was not trying to move her consciousness into a new body. Instead, he was creating a bridge between the biological and the mechanical, between the Xinthian technology and something more human, something based on understanding and adaptation. The device he created was beautiful in its simplicity. It had a crown of silver filaments that would sit gently on Eleanor's head. These filaments would connect to biological conductors that worked with her natural body chemistry instead of against it. The system would interpret the small electrical signals that her brain was still producing, even though the neural implant was damaged. It would translate these signals into something that could produce sound and speech. But the most important part of the system was something that all the other scientists had missed. Thomas had built-in haptic feedback, which meant the device would vibrate against Eleanor's skin to help her feel connected to the communication. He had designed a sound synthesis system that would not just translate her thoughts into words, but would do so in a way that sounded natural and warm like a real voice. As Thomas worked on the device, Eleanor watched him with growing hope. She could see that he was not trying to force her into a technological solution that her body and mind would reject. He was creating something that worked with who she was, not against her. One day, as Thomas was making the final adjustments to the crown, Eleanor reached out and took his hand. She squeezed it gently, and it was the first truly meaningful gesture of connection that anyone had received from her since the accident. Thomas understood what she was trying to say. She was saying thank you. She was saying that she believed in him. She was saying that whatever happened next, she was grateful that he had listened to her. Thomas squeezed her hand back and smiled. "We're almost there," he said quietly. "Very soon you're going to be able to tell everyone what you've been thinking all this time. And I have a feeling they're going to be amazed by what they hear." Eleanor smiled back at him, and for the first time in 3 months, that smile held real, genuine hope. The device was complete. After weeks of careful work, Thomas had finished the final adjustments to the crown that would restore Eleanor's voice. The silver filaments gleamed under the lights of his workshop, and the biological conductors pulsed with a soft, gentle glow. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. But Thomas was terrified. He had checked the device 100 times. He had run every test he could think of. He had made sure that every connection was secure and every circuit was functioning properly. The technology was sound. The theory was correct. But there was always a chance, however small, that something could go wrong. There was always a chance that this would not work, that Eleanor would be disappointed once again, that the Empress would be devastated by another failure. Thomas had not slept in 72 hours. He had been so focused on completing the device that he had forgotten about everything else. He had forgotten to eat. He had forgotten to rest. He had simply worked, piece by piece, connection by connection, until the device was finished. Now, sitting in his workshop in the early hours of the morning, Thomas held the crown in his hands and wondered if he had done enough. He made his way to Eleanor's chambers as the sun began to rise over the palace. The guards let him pass without question. Everyone in the palace knew by now that this human mechanic was different from the other visitors. He was not here for money or glory. He was here to help the princess. Eleanor was already awake when he arrived. She had been awake most nights, too anxious to sleep, her mind racing with hope and fear. When she saw Thomas enter her chamber with the device in his hands, she sat up immediately. Her eyes grew wide and her hand moved to her mouth. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked gently. Eleanor nodded. She could not write her response fast enough. She simply nodded again and again, her whole body trembling with anticipation and nervous energy. Thomas helped her sit in a comfortable chair by the window. He took the crown carefully in his hands and explained what would happen. The filaments would connect to her neural pathways, the ones that had survived the accident. The device would read the electrical signals from her brain and translate them into sound. It might feel strange at first. It might take a few moments for everything to synchronize. But if all went well, she would be able to speak. Eleanor closed her eyes as Thomas placed the crown gently on her head. She felt the cool touch of the silver filaments against her skin. She felt the biological conductors settle into place, forming a connection with her nervous system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the device began to hum softly, a gentle vibration that she could feel throughout her entire head and body. Thomas activated the system. Light began to dance across the device, creating patterns that were beautiful and mesmerizing. Eleanor's body stiffened as the interface synchronized with her neural patterns. Thomas watched her carefully, ready to shut everything down if something went wrong. Her breathing became shallow. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair. Seconds stretched into what felt like eternities. The workshop was completely silent except for the soft humming of the device. Thomas held his breath. Eleanor held her breath. Even the palace seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something momentous to happen. Then a sound emerged. It was soft at first, so quiet that Thomas almost missed it. It was a human voice, warm and clear, speaking in the Xynthian language but with an accent that was entirely Eleanor's own. The voice was beautiful and natural, as if it had been waiting inside her this whole time, just waiting for the right moment to come out. "I can." Eleanor's voice trembled with emotion and wonder. "I can speak." Thomas felt tears spring to his eyes. He had to sit down because his legs suddenly felt too weak to support him. The device was working. It was actually working. After all the failed attempts by the greatest minds in the galaxy, it was working. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at Thomas with an expression of pure joy and disbelief. She tried to speak again, and this time her voice was stronger, more confident. She said simple words at first, testing out the device, making sure it was really working. "Hello," she said. "I am Eleanor. I can speak. I can speak." The words seemed small compared to the magnitude of their meaning. But in that moment, in that quiet workshop as the sun continued to rise over the palace gardens, those words were everything. Guards and attendants heard the sound of a voice coming from the princess's chambers for the first time in 3 months. They began to gather outside the door, confused and curious. News spread through the palace like wildfire. The princess was speaking. The human had done it. The impossible had become possible. Empress Lydia rushed to Eleanor's chambers, her guards struggling to keep up with her. When she entered and saw her daughter sitting in the chair with the silver crown on her head, speaking words in a clear and beautiful voice, she froze. For a moment she could not move or speak or do anything except stare. "Eleanor?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mother," Eleanor said, and her voice was filled with so much love and emotion that it seemed to fill the entire chamber. "I'm here. I'm still here. I've been here the whole time. I was just waiting for someone to listen." Empress Lydia pulled her daughter into an embrace, and tears streamed down her luminescent face. She held Eleanor close and Eleanor held her back, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. The reunion was beautiful and raw and real in a way that nothing else in the palace had ever been. The chamber erupted into celebration. Attendants cheered and danced. Guards embraced each other. News continued to spread through the palace and then beyond the palace and then across the entire Xynthian homeworld. The princess could speak again. The human mechanic had succeeded where everyone else had failed. Thomas watched from the corner of the chamber, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden celebration. This was not what he had expected. He had just wanted to help. He had not expected parades or celebrations or fame. He had simply wanted to fix something that was broken. Eleanor looked across the room and saw him standing there quietly. She reached out her hand toward him, and when he came to her, she took his hand and squeezed it gently, just as she had done weeks ago in the workshop. "Thank you," she said, speaking the words aloud now, her voice clear and strong and full of gratitude. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for believing when no one else did." Thomas smiled and nodded, unable to speak because his own emotions were too strong. He had come to the palace as an unlikely contender, an outsider who no one believed in. But he had refused to give up. He had listened. He had learned. And he had changed everything. The ceremonial hall of the Zynthian Palace was the most magnificent room Thomas had ever seen. The walls rose high above his head, constructed entirely from crystalline material that glowed with soft, shifting colors. Thousands upon thousands of important figures from across the galaxy had gathered here, all of them dressed in formal attire that sparkled and shimmered in the light. Ambassadors from different star systems stood in organized groups. Scientists and philosophers occupied reserved seating. Military leaders and government officials clustered together in quiet conversation. Everyone was here to witness something momentous, something that would be remembered for generations to come. Thomas stood in the center of the hall, wearing formal clothes that the palace had provided for him. The clothes were fine and expensive, but they felt strange against his skin. He had never been comfortable in formal dress. He was a mechanic, a salvage yard worker, someone who spent his days with dirt under his fingernails and grease staining his clothes. Being surrounded by all this wealth and power made him feel like he did not belong here. But he was about to find out that he did belong here, in a way he had never imagined. Empress Lydia approached him, walking slowly and deliberately down the center of the hall. Eleanor walked beside her mother, and her steps were confident and sure. The princess wore a dress that was even more magnificent than the Empress's own, white and shimmering like starlight. And as she walked, Eleanor was speaking, her voice clear and beautiful, greeting people and speaking words that had been locked inside her for so long. When the Empress and Eleanor reached Thomas, the entire hall fell silent. Thousands of beings stopped talking and turned their attention to this moment. This was what everyone had come to see. This was why the most important people in the galaxy had gathered in this room. "Thomas Wright of humanity," Empress Lydia announced, and her voice was amplified throughout the hall, echoing off the crystalline walls. "You have been offered wealth beyond measure. You have been offered a position of endless honor in the Zynthian collective. You have been offered everything that material power and influence can provide." Thomas felt his heart beginning to beat faster. He knew what was coming. He had thought about this moment many times during his journey to the palace. The Empress was about to ask him what he wanted as his reward. "What do you choose?" Eleanor asked, and her voice was filled with curiosity and affection. This was the first time she had spoken these words aloud, the first time she had been able to voice this important question. "What is your desire, Thomas? What will make you happy?" Thomas took a breath. He had prepared for this moment, but now that it was actually here, he felt uncertain. He looked out at the thousands of beings watching him, waiting to hear what this human would say. He looked at Eleanor, whose face was full of hope and kindness. He looked at Empress Lydia, whose eyes held the weight of an entire civilization. "I choose something different," Thomas said quietly. His voice was small in the enormous hall, but somehow everyone heard him clearly. "I do not choose wealth. I do not choose a position of honor or a place in your government. I choose an alliance." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not what they had expected. No one had ever refused wealth and power before. No one had ever chosen something else. "An alliance between humanity and the Zynthian collective," Thomas continued, speaking more firmly now. "Not because we are equals in technology. Your people are far ahead of mine. You have accomplished things that humans have only dreamed about. But because we are equals in perspective. We see the world differently." Empress Lydia's expression was difficult to read. She waited for Thomas to continue. "Humanity understands limitation," Thomas went on. "We have built everything we have from constraint and creativity. We have learned to see problems from angles that advanced civilizations overlook because you have never had to struggle the way we have. Your scientists tried to solve Eleanor's problem using the most advanced technology available. They tried to use the most complicated solutions. But what Eleanor needed was not the most advanced solution. She needed the most human one." Eleanor squeezed Thomas's hand gently, encouraging him to continue. "When I came to the palace, no one believed that I could help," Thomas said. "They laughed at me. They called me primitive. They said I had nothing to offer a civilization as advanced as the Zynthians. But I had something that your greatest scientists did not have. I had experience with limitation. I had learned to improvise. I had learned to see problems from a different angle. That is what humanity offers to this galaxy. Not technology, not weapons, not conquest, but a different way of thinking. A different way of solving problems. The hall was completely silent now. Every being in the room was listening intently to this human mechanic, this outsider who had accomplished the impossible. I believe that if the Xinthian collective formed a true alliance with humanity, both of our civilizations would benefit, Thomas concluded. We have something to learn from each other. Humanity can offer perspective and creativity. The Xinthians can offer knowledge and technology. Together, we could accomplish things that neither of us could accomplish alone. For a long moment, Empress Lydia said nothing. She simply looked at Thomas, her luminescent eyes studying his face. Then, slowly, a smile appeared on her face. It was a smile that transcended species boundaries, a smile that spoke of understanding and respect. An alliance, the Empress repeated. Not a charity. Not a gift. Not a reward for services rendered. A true partnership between two civilizations that have much to learn from each other. Yes, Thomas said simply. The Empress turned to face the assembled crowd. I declare this day a new beginning for the Xinthian collective and for humanity, she announced. From this moment forward, we are allies. We are partners. We will work together to build a better future for all beings in this galaxy. The hall erupted into celebration. But this time, it was different from the celebration after Eleanor's voice had been restored. This celebration felt more significant, more historic. This was not just a moment of joy. This was a turning point. This was the moment when the galaxy's perspective on humanity changed forever. Thomas stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by thousands of beings who were now looking at him with respect and curiosity instead of dismissal and doubt. Eleanor remained at his side, her hand still holding his, speaking quietly to him while the celebration continued around them. In the weeks and months that followed, Thomas remained on the Xinthian homeworld, but not as a servant or a slave or even as an honored guest. He remained as the first ambassador of human innovation and human perspective. Other humans began to arrive at the palace, engineers and scientists and thinkers who wanted to participate in this new alliance. Together, they began to share human knowledge and human ways of solving problems with the Xinthians. And slowly, subtly, the entire galaxy began to see humanity in a new light. Humans were no longer primitive. They were different. And in a galaxy that had become too focused on complexity and advanced technology, different was exactly what was needed. Back on Kepler Station, in the salvage yard where Thomas had spent 20 years working quietly and alone, younger humans looked up at the stars with new hope and new determination. They knew that one of their own, an ordinary mechanic from a forgotten place, had proven that ingenuity and compassion and human stubbornness could change the fate of the entire galaxy. And if Thomas could do it, then maybe they could do it too. The Empress kept her promise. She offered Thomas everything she had promised. But Thomas had already received what he truly wanted. He had received something far more valuable than wealth or power. He had received the knowledge that humanity had something important to offer to the universe. And that knowledge changed everything.